Okay, I'm gonna kind of get started here. We have a pretty small turnout tonight, unfortunately, but I figured that being you guys are sort of on a long weekend, so I'm gonna kind of begin to kind of go over this stuff. Hopefully, you guys have some sort of questions for us. Can you guys hear me? Just let me know in your chat, please, when you can. Cool. All right. Small turnout again. So I'm gonna get this webcam going right here. You should be able to. Sorry, it's not properly on me. Still not focused on me. There we go. Whoop. Seems like out of focus. Not that it'll hopefully get back in. There we go. Okay. I shouldn't need this on actually now that I think about it. Can you guys hear me just as well? Hopefully, let me adjust the mic. Make sure we're on the right webcam, microphone, webcam. Okay, now we should be good to go. So, your quiz, guys, is going to be on basically chapter 4. Chapter 4, more or less, basically talks about Washington's presidency to James Madison's presidency, really all the way through the War of 1812 is what we covered. So really what's known as the early republic, really kind of when the nation kind of gets its start, and really how long does it take for videos to upload to YouTube? It depends on a number of different things. Depends how long it is, Joanna, for starters, and the quality of the video and everything like that. Ultimately the file size. So anyway, basically we're going to be talking about Washington and all the way through to Madison, right? So hopefully you guys have some questions for me. If not, I'm going to kind of do my usual, just kind of running through some things I think you guys should know, maybe a quick once-over run-through of the material, and you guys can ask whatever questions that you have as I go. So if there are any specific questions, now's the time to place them in. Otherwise, I'm going to kind of get rolling and kind of clue you guys in. So let's kind of, for starters, right, I'm going to bring up the graphic organizer that you guys have on in class. So I can kind of talk over this point to point if you guys want, or I can go over notes with some visuals. Which would you guys prefer? Just let me know in the chat when you guys get a handle of that. So just remember, right, there are two sides to this graphic organizer. This is what is to be expected to you, right? This is going to come all the way down, again, from George Washington and his presidency. So the things that he experiences, right, the Jay's Treaty, the Pinckney's Treaty, Whiskey Rebellion, that kind of stuff. All the way to Madison and the War of 1812 and the Battle of Tippecanoe and such. So, if you guys it might be a good idea to grab that out if you want to kind of fill it in if you haven't yet. You can kind of work on this as I kind of talk over some of the points from the PowerPoint as well. So I'm going to kind of be referring back to this as we go forward here. So let me put the first PowerPoint up here, right? So this is again, these are kind of my own PowerPoints, but I think it more or less covers the exact same stuff, and we can go from there. If you have any questions, again, as I'm going over this, don't be afraid to ask, right? So the first president is, of course, George Washington, right? He's going to be kind of chosen as the first president. It's going to be essentially running unopposed. It's more or less unanimous support, and the electors are going to basically choose him as the first president. There's no official election, no national election. You're going to have the Electoral College decide the first one for Washington, and that's not something you really need to know for the class. It's just something that's just interesting tidbit. For sure. But George Washington is going to set a number of what we, whoops, I couldn't highlight that, a number of what we call precedents, right? So he is the president setting precedent. And precedent is basically setting an example, right, of what you can and can't do or what you should or shouldn't do, following Washington's example for a number of things, right? So the first that we talk about, is for sure is this idea that he's only going to serve 2 terms, right? That's going to be a big one. That all the presidents after him, all the way up through FDR, are going to essentially actually only serve 2 as well, and that's going to be kind of by choice, right? There's nothing in the Constitution limiting presidents to 2 terms until after actual FDR. So it's just something that Washington does and everyone follows. Another thing is going to be kind of this civilian clothing, right? He is this big general from the American Revolution. He could kind of probably wear whatever he wanted off here. He's kind of going to set a modest tone to the presidency. He's not wearing any fancy garb, no kingly attire, and that kind of stuff, right? So another thing that he's going to kind of establish is this cabinet. And basically, he's going to push through Congress the establishment of the cabinet. He's going to kind of set 3 kind of real big departments initially here. And the cabinet, if you remember, the idea is that the cabinet members are essentially going to be arms of the executive branch, right? The president can't be everywhere all at once, and as a result of that, he's going to hire people that are good at what they do, to be able to kind of help handle certain situations depending on what they are, and also be kind of their representative for those particular parts, right? It all runs through the president, but basically these guys can act somewhat autonomously in order to be able to make decisions if the president isn't there, right? George Washington can't be everywhere at once, as I said before. So the State Department is going to be the kind of one of the, I keep clicking that, wishing I could highlight. The State Department is going to be kind of one of these first ones, right? And it's going to be dealing with the relationships with other nations, foreign nations, diplomacy, that kind of stuff. And Thomas Jefferson is going to be given that job. So anyway, you are basically going to continue on, and you're going to have the Treasury Department, and the Treasury Department is going to be run by a man named Alexander Hamilton, and they're going to be dealing with the financial matters of the country, right? It's going to be really important because Hamilton's going to create his economic plan, which we're going to be talking about momentarily, and it's going to be really, really big and be a contentious issue for all of the different groups of people dealt with in government. So you also have the War Department. The War Department is basically the Secretary of Defense today. The War Department is going to change its title after World War II to the Defense Department, but the man named Henry Knox is going to be the one who takes charge of that. Okay, so going down, you're going to get also this thing called the Judiciary Act. The Judiciary Act is going to be pushed through Congress. It's going to establish the court system. The court system, this idea that federal courts are going to kind of be higher up than state courts. Federal courts can actually reverse state decisions and that kind of stuff. And a man named John Jay is going to be chosen to lead the first Supreme Court as the first Chief Justice. The big Chief Justice, whose name is from Virginia, that we're going to be talking about too, is a man named John Marshall in the Marshall Court, and he's going to be really important for your SOL. So, financial problems, right? Washington he feels he's going to kind of focus more on the foreign affairs and military matters on some level. He's going to kind of really give other issues to the cabinet members, and the national debt in one left over from the American Revolution is going to essentially be able to, is going to need to be taken care of, right? So that's going to be the first thing that Alexander Hamilton is going to actually deal with. He is going to develop this financial plan that's going to basically, the idea is to be able to pay off national debt, to individual holders, so these bonds they're called, and other countries. Basically, you are going to have the federal, government, his plan is to pay back state debts, and by doing this, it's going to have the states actually have a strong interest in the success of the national government. Okay? And so there's going to be opposition to Hamilton's plan. For one, you're going to have some of the states in the South, in particular, like Virginia, who actually had more or less paid back all of the debt from the Revolution. They're going to be really opposed to this. They don't want to take on the debt of the other states. They just don't think that's particularly fair. And Democratic Republicans are going to want a completely different financial system in place in comparison to Alexander Hamilton. The South, as I said, it kind of accumulated a lot less of this debt, right? So the plan is going to be, it's going to be accepted with by the Republicans, by the Democratic Republicans, really with a compromise, though. It's going to really, there's going to be this heated debate. Really, Hamilton's job's going to be more or less on the line. Jefferson and Madison are going to scheme, and they're going to kind of meet in this backroom deal, backroom dinner, essentially, behind closed doors, and kind of make this plan, this idea that they will actually push the economic plan through Congress if you basically get Washington, D.C. as the capital of the United States. And that's going to be kind of the compromise that they actually make, and it's going to actually push the economic system through, right? And one of the parts of this economic plan is the creation of a national bank. And the national bank is really going to hold public funds. It's going to issue a standard currency, but the difference is it's going to be mostly under private ownership. And that's going to be kind of an area of contention as well, that national bank. People aren't going to like it particularly much. You're also going to get a tariff, right, a tax on imported or exported goods to really encourage the purchase of American products, right? If things are more expensive coming from other countries, American industry and American products are going to be are cheaper for Americans to purchase. And then lastly is this tax on whiskey, okay? And this is going to be a major problem for people out west, in particular in western Pennsylvania, and you're actually going to get what's known as the Whiskey Rebellion based off of it. The taxes lead to this rebellion. Many of these farmers had actually relied on bartering, trading for goods out west, right? And you're going to ultimately have no real money, no hard currency to pay this tax. And they're going to get frustrated, and they're going to kind of just arm themselves, and they're going to revolt, and you're going to get a couple, thousands of these people basically attacking Pittsburgh, and Washington is going to send an army across the Appalachian Mountains to be able to deal with them. And this is going to be important because it's going to set what's known as, the precedent, that if you want to change a law, that you have to do so peacefully. So these are just interesting pictures, paintings. You're going to have Washington leading his men. This is actually the only time that the American president has actually ever led the army into battle as the commander-in-chief. He really takes them as far as the Appalachian Mountains before he pushes the army over under the leadership of Alexander Hamilton. And then you're also going to have just a picture of this kind of the tax collector being tarred and feathered, which we saw that in class. And ultimately, that's going to be, it's going to be squashed by the army coming over the Appalachian Mountains, right? So, you're going to also have this Battle of Fallen Timbers, which I know for a fact is on your sheet, on your graphic organizer. And this is basically what's going on, is that as the Americans begin to push westward into the Northwest Territory, you are going to have Native Americans basically pushing back a little bit. They're going to kind of deny that the Americans, why did everyone want DC as the capital? Like, what's so significant about it for it to be the capital? So, AJ, to answer that question, basically it's just that, right, the capital, it was looking like it was in New Jersey, so it's a bit farther north for these people, right? So I think on some level it's a compromise to be close to where they live, right? All these Virginians, they live relatively close to D.C. in comparison to having to go up to New York or New Jersey and Trenton. And I think it's something that they like to have the capital in the South. It was significant to them because they viewed themselves as Southerners, right? So back to this Battle of Fallen Timbers, you're going to basically have this battle out west in Ohio, where you're going to have the American army kind of going up against a group of Native Americans and a small contingent of British. And that's going to be important because the British are going to continuously provoking the Native Americans to kind of push against the Americans settling west, and that tension is going to actually lead, as the tension builds up, into the War of 1812 against the British. Okay, so you're going to now have this issue of what's called neutrality, and basically you're going to have this French Revolution starting off in France, right? The monarchy is overthrown, and it's going to kind of seem on the surface anyway that it's going to kind of embody many of these ideals of the American Revolution, but it's going to turn bloody. You know, you've heard of Robespierre and all of the guillotine, you know, cutting off people's heads and that kind of stuff in World II. So some members of the government are actually going to support this, support France anyway, and some are not, right? It's just they don't see how they see it as anarchy, right? And it's not something that they can actually support. To top that all off, Britain and France are going to go to war in 1793, and the French, you know, are going to say, hey, look, we scratched your back in the American Revolution, now it's time for you to basically scratch our back, right? And kind of we helped you, you help us. What's going to happen is you're going to get these two different factions develop. You're going to get these different factions develop. Where do I have? I'll go to the parties here. It's not perfectly in order. You're going to have these factions develop based kind of around these ideas, right? You're going to have the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. The Federalists are led by two men in particular, John Adams and Alexander Hamilton. And basically, these were originally the people that had supported the ratification of the Constitution, if you remember, right? These people are going to be more for a looser interpretation of the Constitution, right? There are implied powers that the Constitution has. And therefore, by having a looser interpretation of the Constitution, you're going to have a pretty strong central government. And they are going to be basically having their support for Great Britain. So you're also, the other faction that's going to develop, this other political party, is going to be known as the Democratic Republicans. The Democratic Republicans are going to kind of be the inverse of that, the opposite of that, right? And you're going to basically have this group wanting kind of a small, limited amount of government power, and basically feeling that there needs to be a strict interpretation of the Constitution. They feel that having a strong federal government is going to endanger the individual liberties of people, as well as the states. So these people are people that really support France. So you're going to get this whole thing over which one are we going to support, and Washington is going to ultimately decide to issue what's called a proclamation of neutrality, saying that we're not going to support either of them. Okay, so you're going to have these two last things, really, that we need to talk about for Washington, known as Jay's Treaty and Pinckney's Treaty, which I know that they both show up on your graphic organizer. So Jay's Treaty is basically going to end a couple of different things going on with the British. It's going to at least put it to ease for a little bit. And that first being the British are going to actually withdraw troops from U.S. soil. Remember, as we were saying, you know, they had just fought a little bit over out in Ohio, and you're going to basically have the British kind of withdrawing back up into their territory in Canada. You're going to have other things going on as well, but that's going to be the big, and it's going to end the impressment of American sailors by the British in the oceans as well. You're also going to have Pinckney's Treaty, which comes up, which, to kind of make it understand it a little bit more, the actual name of what it's called is this Treaty of Friendship, Limits, and Navigation between Spain and the United States. So after Jay's Treaty, the Spanish had kind of feared that the U.S. and the British were going to kind of join together, so they kind of decided to have this treaty that's going to allow the Americans to navigate up the Mississippi River and right to trade at New Orleans. And it's going to actually set boundaries for Florida, which really were kind of loose at the time. So Washington's going to give this big farewell address on the way out after his second term, right after it sets a precedent that he's going to step down after 2. And he's going to advise against political parties. He's going to be basically talking about be wary of entanglements with other nations. And then lastly, he's going to be saying, be mindful of national debt in this kind of really grand, eloquent speech. And it's going to be really one of these important things in American history. It's going to set these precedents, right? So, as we just kind of talked about the early political parties. Remember, the Federalists are John Adams and George Washington and Alexander Hamilton being the big one. Washington kind of really didn't see himself as part of one of these parties, though, but his ideals were supported by the Federalists. And the Democratic Republicans are going to be Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and this guy named Aaron Burr, which will show up momentarily. So, you're going to now get an election in 1796, right? And it's going to be a close one, but John Adams is ultimately going to win. And what's going to happen is that there's no rule of how this works. You don't run a vice presidential candidate on the same ticket as the president yet. So the person who takes second is actually going to end up being the vice president, which is going to be really difficult because you have a Federalist president and a Republican, right, Democratic Republican vice president in Thomas Jefferson. So as far as agreeing goes, it's not going to particularly work. This is just a map of the Electoral College and how it turned out. John Adams, you can see, won by 71 to 68 when it was all said and done. So, John Adams, he's going to have to deal with some of the issues that were left over with the Washington presidency. So the big thing is that when the Americans had signed what's known as Jay's Treaty with the British, the French, who had basically been saying, hey, we should go to war against the British and you should help us because we helped you during the American Revolution, they're going to get upset. They're going to get really frustrated. And they're going to basically start attacking American shipping. And once this is going on, and when this goes on for a relatively long period of time, John Adams is going to send these people, these 3 commissioners, over to France. And this is going to become known as the XYZ affair. And they're basically going to show up in France. Their actual names are right there. John Marshall, who is actually one of them, who's going to be this big-time Supreme Court justice coming up. Charles Pinckney, the guy who just negotiated that Pinckney Treaty. But you don't really need to know those names for these guys who are in here. But basically, they show up in France, and they're going to basically demand this money to meet with the foreign minister, whose name was Talleyrand. And basically, the people that represent Talleyrand are going to demand a bribe and a loan to France in order to really even consider talking to them and negotiating their ways out of this. The Americans return home, and they're really, really frustrated and actually really pissed off about what they did. And when they come home and basically tell the American public what had just happened, many Americans are going to be angry, and they're going to be frustrated too, and they're going to be actually calling for some sort of war with the French. And some people some people are against the war, some people are for the war. John Adams is going to keep a relatively level head, and we're not going to actually engage in a full-scale conflict here. But what John Adams is going to do is going to basically promote the creation of an American kind of navy, an American fleet, to basically be able to kind of protect themselves against the French fleet, the French groups that were attacking American shipping and seizing our ships. So that's going to be really important because it's going to become known as this undeclared war with France, other words known as the quasi-war with France. The Americans are going to basically push France into a corner with how many ships that they actually seize and take over, that the French are going to basically give up and give in. But what's going to happen is that when that's all happening, Napoleon is going to come to power in France, and it won't really matter too much anyway because French are going to develop a very different foreign policy with Napoleon. Okay, so that's actually really the crowning moment of the John Adams presidency, and what you're also going to get now is the other side of John Adams' presidency, the reason why he's only going to become a one-term president, and that is known as the Alien and Sedition Act. So to answer your question, AJ, being, what is the effect of the Alien and Sedition Acts on John Adams, is he's going to get these 4 bills passed, and he's going to sign them, right? And the 4 bills are actually 4 laws that are going to be actually created are right here. So the first one is going to be known as the Naturalization Act. And the Naturalization Act is basically going to change the amount of time that it takes to become an American citizen. It's going to go from 5 years to 14 years. The second is going to be known as the Alien Act. The Alien Act is basically going to say that the government can actually deport any resident alien, so someone who is living in America who is not from America, if they considered them dangerous to the peace and the safety of the United States. But that's actually a pretty big deal, right? Just imagine being able to just say, oh, you're not American, but you're from a different country, and we're at war with you, or we're not comfortable with you being here, so we're going to get rid of you, or deport you, or detain you, right? So then you have the Alien Enemy Act, and this is basically very similar, right? It's going to be deport or detain resident aliens if that we, the United States, are at war with their home countries. Okay, and this last one is really probably the thing that really hits the biggest nerve is going to be known as the Sedition Act. And the Sedition Act is going to basically make it a crime to publish any writing against the government. And I mean, we just signed the Constitution, right? This whole idea of freedom of speech in the Constitution is going to really, this is going to go against that completely, and many people are going to be really frustrated and pissed off, and that's going to basically really make people frustrated with John Adams. And the real kicker, and my favorite part of this entire thing, is that it's going to be set to expire after 2 years. So it's actually going to be set to expire the day after John Adams would leave the presidency. So it's just funny because, right, you can't criticize my government, but when it's all said and done, if someone else's other party is going to come in, we can definitely criticize them. So what's the impact of the nation as a whole? It's just a really interesting time, AJ, because these acts really frustrate a lot of people. And that's one of the reasons why, because of this being scared of the French and what's going on, it's going to lead to these kind of encroachments on civil liberties, which actually happens relatively frequently throughout American history. And you're going to get a number of people obviously frustrated enough that they're not going to even consider voting for John Adams in the next election. Okay, so you're going to have this last thing is this Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, where basically these two states are basically going to say that the Alien and Sedition Acts would not be put into action because they feel that it is against the Constitution. It's against that First Amendment, right? And they basically say that states can nullify, can get rid of laws they feel are ultimately unconstitutional. Okay, so this is going to kind of reaffirm that 10th Amendment, right? If something isn't explicitly stated in the Constitution, it's going to be left to the states to be able to decide what to do. Okay, so that's kind of it for John Adams and George Washington. We're going to switch over to Thomas Jefferson and Madison now. So let me get that up. Okay, so you're going to have this new election in 1800. It's going to be this really big, important election for a couple of different reasons. You're going to get a deadlock tie. It's a really nasty election between this man named Aaron Burr. I'm holding up AJ. So AJ, the Virginia and Kentucky resolution, basically, it's going to basically, again, it's going to kind of set up this us versus them, this South versus the North mentality. It's going to begin this idea of sectionalism, really creating a rift between the differences between the North and South, which are going to kind of just begin to stew and stew and stew and stew all the way up until the Civil War. And we're going to be kind of talk about that all the way up through our next couple of units. This PowerPoint is not Joanna. No, these are my own particular PowerPoints. If you really want, I can provide links to them to help you if you'd like. These are again different PowerPoints than what we used in class. So let's go down to Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson is going to win in 1800. He's going to be elected the 3rd president, and this is going to be really important because this is a change of power, right? We're going to get very different ideologies basically winning this election from the previous group, right? So it's going to transfer from Federalists to Democratic Republicans peacefully, right? And that's going to be really, really important for this election. That's the election of 1800, right? And Thomas Jefferson's going to actually create a push for a new amendment, which is going to kind of now separate the differences between president and vice president. That the second place will no longer become the vice president because Jefferson is very not happy with Aaron Burr as his vice president. So he's going to give this big inaugural address, and the Republicans are really known for being wise and frugal, supporting state governments and individual liberties, and kind of having a smaller central government, right? It's this idea of laissez-faire, let the people do what they choose. So James Madison is going to be his Secretary of State. They're going to get rid of these Alien and Sedition Acts, and they're going to allow them to expire. He's going to repeal many of the taxes under John Adams, and he's going to deal with John Adams' Judicial Act, which basically you're going to get John Adams trying to appoint some judges at the very end of his presidency. They're not going to go through, but the judges are going to be upset. So judicial review. Judicial review is going to come from this court case called Marbury versus Madison. Maybe just try to refresh. Maybe try and refresh. Okay, so judicial review. It's going to basically say, is this doctrine under which legislative and executive actions are subject to review by the judiciary, or in this case, the Supreme Court. So it's going to set up this possibility. It's going to set up this idea, right, that the Supreme Court has the final say on whether or not laws or executive actions are constitutional, right? This Marbury versus Madison case. It is super, super important, and it's going to set that precedent of the Supreme Court having this power. Whoops. I just like to have this one up here because it's kind of funny. You're going to have Napoleon coming to power in France, right? Napoleon born to party. I just find this picture hysterical. So he's going to need money for his wars in Europe. So he's going to sell the Louisiana Territory to the Americans. And he's going to basically sell this in what's known as the Louisiana Purchase. And basically it's going to be this deal where the Americans purchase this for about $15 million. And it's going to double the size of the American territory, right? So this green right here is going to represent basically the size of the Louisiana Territory, and naturally once you get this territory you're going to need to explore it, right? So you're going to get Thomas Jefferson sending the Lewis and Clark expedition, basically leaving from Ohio in the Ohio River Valley. They're going to kind of go over to the Mississippi River, which is kind of right along this border. The Mississippi River is going to take the Missouri River kind of over here to the Rocky Mountains, and they're going to basically talk to Native Americans along the way, engage with conversations. They're going to set up different forts kind of for where they winter, and they're going to also map and chart and all of that stuff, all of the new explored territory that they come across. They're going to survive all the way to the Pacific Ocean. You're only going to lose actually 1 or 2 people, and they're going to make their way all the way back over a 3-year journey, and it's going to be really, really important for kind of opening up the West and kind of charting what's there and letting people know. So you're going to have some opposition to this, though, right? Because this is kind of be a little bit opposed to. It's going to be opposed. It's not going to be this really what Thomas Jefferson really believes, right? He believes in this small government, and he just kind of bought without real any authorization all this land from Napoleon. So the Federalists are going to be they're going to feel that Jefferson had really overstepped his bounds. And you're going to ultimately get this duel as well between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. And it's going to be this big, big moment, right, where Alexander Hamilton is killed by Aaron Burr, who happens to be the sitting vice president, in this duel. So Jefferson's going to win pretty easily re-election in 1804, and there's going to be new challenges emerging, right? And this is going to basically be the rights of sailing the seas and sailing the oceans and trading in the oceans and things like that. It's going to be called neutral rights. And basically you're going to get the British blockading the French coast. They're going to search all ships that are going there, right? And the French, in response, would also search the British ships. So it's really difficult to trade to either of these countries. You're also going to get the continued impressment of American citizens by the British, and you're actually going to have this fight between the Leopard and the Chesapeake. This British ship is going to cripple an American ship just off the American shoreline. And again, you're going to get this kind of this debate. Both these countries are really, really pushing our buttons. Who are we going to go to war with? The Democratic Republicans are going to say we should go to war with England, right? They are these people that kind of want to support France, and the Federalists are going to be kind of more the opposite. They're going to feel we should go to war with France because they feel that the British are going to be more useful allies in the future. So the impressment is going to lead to what's known as what's called the Embargo Act, and you're going to get the first Embargo Act. It's going to ban imports and exports to all countries. I'm hoping to really hurt the British, but that's really silly, right? It's going to be extremely ineffective because Britain's going to get their trading elsewhere, particularly in Latin America, but if you ban importing and exports to all countries, it's going to also hurt American business. For sure, right? The Americans can't sell to other countries, and that's going to really hurt their bottom dollar. So you're going to get this new election in 1808, and a Democratic Republican is going to win again. James Madison is going to win the election against the Federalist Charles Pinckney, and he's going to win by a landslide, essentially, 122 votes to 47. And again, this is just for your own knowledge. Just know it's a landslide. So Madison's going to come into power, and he's going to kind of replace that Embargo Act. He's going to really prohibit trade only with Britain and France. It's going to be called the Non-Intercourse Act. But the question is going to become is, who do we go to war with? We're going to go to war with France, or we're going to go to war with Britain. So you're going to have the British, again, aligning themselves with Native Americans out west. And when they do this, mixed with the impressment, and you're going to also have this battle known as the Battle of Tippecanoe between the leader of really part of this Tecumseh Confederacy of Native Americans and this man named General William Henry Harrison out in Indiana, and you're going to basically have this battle that happens again. The U.S. is going to become victorious. It's going to propel this man into the spotlight, but the Native Americans are now going to kind of join the British in Canada, and tensions are going to just grow even further. So what's going to happen is you're going to have the Democratic Republicans, many of them pushing for war with Britain because of these slights against the Americans, right? And you're going to get these war hawks, they're called. The Federalists are calling them war hawks because they feel that they're pressuring the president towards war with the British, and you're going to bring on this nationalism, right? It's going to bring this renewed sense of American patriotism, and the army is going to actually hugely grow. Ultimately, Madison is going to declare war with this war message and war resolution in 1812, and war is going to be declared, right? So you're going to get what's known as Mr. Madison's War, the War of 1812, and the Americans are going to be really unprepared at first. They're going to underestimate the strength of the British and the Native American alliance, and they're going to kind of begin this start of the war really out west. The British are going to actually have taken control of Detroit and the Great Lakes area with the Native American alliance under Tecumseh, but the Americans are going to kind of actually get this back under a man named Oliver Hazard Perry, who's going to win back Lake Erie and kind of achieve another major victory at what's called the Battle of Thames in Canada. And this is actually going to be where Tecumseh is killed, who's this leader of this Confederacy of Native Americans who really just didn't want the Americans heading west anymore and kind of going against them. And it's going to really end these hopes of these Native Americans. The Confederation is going to kind of die with Tecumseh, and you're going to have more fighting with Native Americans down south under Andrew Jackson. But ultimately, the Americans start doing well in the west, but the war in England, in Europe with Napoleon is going to kind of come to an end. Napoleon is going to be defeated, right? And when Napoleon is defeated, it's going to free them up. The causes of the War of 1812 are essentially the British provoking the Native Americans to kind of attack the Americans in the Northwest Territory, and also the continued impressment of sailors and basically stopping American shipping from interacting with the French or other countries in Europe. So basically, once Napoleon falls, it's going to allow the British to reprioritize this war, and you're going to get the priority, and they're going to also have a lot more resources to be able to kind of fight in North America. So the British are going to kind of reappear, and they're going to appear, and they're going to basically come into Washington, D.C. They're going to burn part of Washington, D.C. They're going to burn the White House and the Capitol building. Dolly Madison and her slaves are going to rescue a number of the artifacts from the White House, in particular the painting, the portrait of George Washington, and from D.C., where they lay waste to D.C., which is only saved by kind of a freak major rainstorm. The British are going to proceed on to Baltimore, which is just a bit north, as you guys should know. So we're getting really close to the end here, guys. You're going to have this Battle of Fort McHenry in Baltimore, where the Americans are ready for the British. They're going to barricade the roads. They're going to block the harbor. You're going to have a relatively substantial army waiting for them, right? And the Americans are going to hold off the British in Baltimore. This is where you're going to get the famous, Francis Scott Key creating the Star-Spangled Banner as the national anthem. This is what the national anthem is singing about, right? That the flag is still there through the night. And this is actually a picture of the flag, the remnants of the flag from the Smithsonian. So, the last real part of this is that the British also attempt to kind of move down into the mainland America through the north from Canada, through Lake Champlain up in New York. The Americans are going to push them back there too. So between the stop of the British in Baltimore and there, it's going to once again convince the Brits that the war is too costly. And you're going to get the Treaty of Ghent, this peace agreement at the end of the war, which basically says that we're going to leave everything exactly the way it was before this war even started, and we are not going to fight anymore. The last piece is that you're going to get this Battle of New Orleans, and the Battle of New Orleans is interesting because it happens after the peace was signed, right? Messages are slow to get around. There's no telegraphs. There's no instant communication like today, and basically they just never got news. So Andrew Jackson is going to win this decisive victory at New Orleans at the mouth of the Mississippi River, which is going to kind of forever have the Americans, have the claim to the Louisiana Territory and the Mississippi River. But the big thing at the very end of this year is that the Federalists, right, who had opposed the war, they're going to lose a lot of respect because the Americans more or less just went toe-to-toe with the British, and they stalemated them, essentially. That's going to be really kind of this big morale boost and nationalistic boost, right? We kind of solidify America's place in the globe, for sure, and in North America, undoubtedly. So AJ, that year, I believe it's just 1813 is when that is taking place. Might be 1814 too, honestly. Let me see if I can find that out for you. It is 1814. 1814 for sure. Okay, so that kind of wraps it up. Any questions, Joanna? I'll give you a link to those two PowerPoints, the two PowerPoints that we just used for the video, if you would like. Give me a second. I'll put them in the chat here. There we go. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong thing. So that is the first PowerPoint. And that is the second PowerPoint. So, to really answer your question, AJ, the two big leaders of the Warhawks, really, who you would call Warhawks, is basically our name Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun. Those are your big Warhawks for sure. So what's significant about the Battle of Tippecanoe? So the Tippecanoe, so let me go back. Tippecanoe is important because it's going to kind of begin to hurt the Native American Confederacy, which was only continuing to grow stronger and stronger. Basically, Tecumseh, he was down south trying to gather more support for his Confederacy, and his brother, who becomes known as the Prophet, and he has this really interesting name that I'm not going to be able to pronounce. It's like Teowahkatana or something like that, just simply known as the Prophet, and basically he's going to lose this battle against William Harris. He's going to lose a number of men, and it's going to really crush the Native Americans' hopes a little bit. It's going to push them north to kind of ally up with the British. Okay, and that's going to kind of lead to the attack in Detroit that we were talked about just before, Detroit and the Great Lakes. Okay. Any last questions? Otherwise, I'm going to shut this down, and it's been a long kind of night, especially before a kind of a free night. So I thank and appreciate all of you who did coming to this. Thank you. So any last questions or not, we will be on our way, and this will be archived, and you can watch it to your heart's content should you want to. Okay, if you have any questions, you can email me, over the course of the next day. 136 joined the Union between 1790 and 1800. 1790 and 1800, you would get, where's the year settled? 1790 and 1800, you would have Rhode Island. There's 4 states. It'd be Rhode Island, Vermont, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Rhode Island, Vermont, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Just reading off the list. Rhode Island, Kentucky, Vermont, and Tennessee are 4. Okay. So on that note, thanks again, guys, and I am off. Have a good evening and enjoy your day off from school again tomorrow.